introduce Pat Roy. Pat has been with us for a few days now. He and his family, Sandy and his two daughters, Melody and Summer, they're out back there. So they're sitting at their table. They're very involved in the ministry, all four of them. And later on, when you take a break, you'll see they have a lot of books and DVDs that Pat and his family has produced. Pat has been involved in the ministry, creation ministry, for probably 25, 30 years now. 12 of those with ICR, the Institute of Creation Research, where he did a lot of production work for the scientists there. He also, for those of you involved with homeschooling, produced a Jonathan Park audio series. Anybody ever hear of Jonathan Park? Homeschoolers certainly would have know about that. And he produced that, and then 2 years ago, he formed this new company, Creation Quest, which also ministers to homeschoolers and to schools, and he does speaking engagements and production of videos as well. Tonight, he's going to speak on this topic of Journey to Novarupta. You may wonder, where is Novarupta? What is that? Well, it's a huge explosion that happened, eruption, a volcanic eruption that occurred in Alaska back in 1912, more than 100 years ago. And so Pat's going to relate that to the creation history and how that supports creation and the flood, the global flood, just like Mount St Helens does, but this is 30 times bigger, as you'll find out here. Pat, come on up. And I'm going to pass around sign-up boards in a minute here too. So if you're not on our mailing list yet, I want to remind you, if you want to get on our mailing list, find out where the next meetings are coming up, just add your name to that board.
Thank you. Well, I just am so grateful to see that this group gets together and meets and discusses all of these things. That's exciting to me. And I'm so excited about Dr. Laiklama and his wife and everything that they're doing and all of the speakers that they bring in. It's just amazing to me that there's so much creation activity happening up in this area. And I just want to say, do you guys feel blessed? I mean, it's kind of neat that this ministry exists and that there's so many creation speakers coming in. Also, Maureen, raise your hand. I want to say thank you to Maureen, who, man, you kept me busy this week. Thank you for all of the arrangements you made. It has been awesome. Thank you. Well, thank you so very much. Well, tonight we're going to talk about the journey to Novarupta, and I'm going to tell you stories tonight. I'm going to tell you stories of action, adventure, science. I'm even going to throw in some romance for you. How's that sound? You guys ready? There you go. So that's what we're up to tonight. Some of you may be wondering, who is Creation Quest? Well, Creation Quest is really just our family's little ministry that we do. One of the first things that we did is we produced a new audio drama series called Time Chroniclers, and basically what this is it's an action-adventure story. It's a fictitious story, but it's telling stories based on history, and basically it's to show the scientific case for creation. And so we tell these stories, and they were designed to keep families entertained while they were in their car, or kids when they're going to sleep at night. And basically we just realized that stories can be such a vehicle for telling the truth about the scientific evidence that's in harmony with God's Word. And so that's what that is all about. Also, I'm teaching at a place called Firmly Planted, which is a homeschool resource down in Vancouver, Washington. I'm teaching creation worldview classes. We've gone through, I think it's 20 different topics now. So they're learning things like Mount St Helens and scientific evidence against evolution, second law of thermodynamics, epigenetics, all of those things. They've gone through 20 different courses down there, and we continue to work on those. We've also started a media team down there. It's my goal to see young people learn what their talents are and their abilities, and to give them a chance to use those abilities to produce productions that will actually reach the world. And I want them to fall in love with using their talents to reach others with the good news of creation and also the gospel. And so we've got about 7 kids who are producing documentaries right now, video documentaries. We've got 2 kids that are producing their own radio dramas, and we've got several other kids that are going to be working on radio programs, it sounds like, for the International Association of Creation. And so we just want to see these kids fall in love with serving the Lord with their talents. So that's one of the things that we're doing. In June, we're planning to take a group of homeschoolers from Vancouver to Wyoming to go on Dr. Chadwick's dig site out there. We're going to be out there for about 10 days, actually camping at the Hansen Research Station, and it'll be a chance for these homeschool families to actually dig up some dinosaur bones. So if you're a homeschool family and you're interested in going, make sure that you let my wife know out there, and we'll put you on a list so that we can let you know. The other thing that we're doing is we're also producing some documentaries. Just probably about a month or 2 ago, I was with Kyle Justice, who's Awesome Science Media. So Kyle Justice produces stuff for Awesome Science Media, and then I'm Creation Quest. And when we come together, we call ourselves the Creation Guys. We shot one episode about the eclipse, and we were just mostly joking around when we made that, but people kind of took it serious, and we said, oh, we're going to make some more episodes. So we actually got to go out to the Ark, and so we're probably going to release in another couple months just a tour through the Ark. So if you haven't been there, you'll get a chance to actually go through the Ark. We were kind of surprised to find out that we don't think anybody else has produced a tour through the Ark encounter yet. So again, that'll be coming out in just probably, hopefully, a couple months. We're almost done editing that, and kind of our style is just, we use a lot of humor, and we just teach creation, and it's kind of fun. I don't think people have combined humor and creation very much, so we're just having fun putting that together. Speaking of that, the big documentary that we've got coming out, hopefully in another month or 2, is about the flat earth. Believe it or not, more people are converting to the flat earth right now than any time ever before, and so we thought this was going to be a fun topic, and then we got working on it, and we found out that this rabbit hole goes much deeper than we thought. There are a lot of people right now that are believing that the earth is flat, and so in our documentary we got to interview General Charlie Duke, who is an astronaut on Apollo 16. We also got to talk to Dr. Danny Faulkner. We also got to talk to Dr. Stephen Boyd about the Hebrew behind it all. And then we ended out with actually getting a chance to fly out to Ohio for a weather balloon launch where we launched up a 360-degree camera, and we actually documented the curvature of the earth. And so those are all the things that are going to be in our documentary. So those are some of the things that we're working on right now. Well, you didn't come here to hear about that. You came to hear about the journey to Novarupta. Now, the reason I like this topic is because when I come to a creationist group like this, I realize that if I fell down dead right now, probably just about any one of you could get up here and finish teaching something about creation, right? You guys probably know more about creation than I do. And so when I come to a group like this, I always like to bring a topic that nobody's heard of. And what's fun is nobody has really heard about Novarupta in the creation movement. Has anybody here really ever studied Novarupta? Okay, there you go. Okay, great. So a few of you have. You were the first ones to ever raise your hand. The reason that I'm telling you about Novarupta is Dr. David Shormann came to us a few years back and said, I would like for somebody to produce a documentary on Novarupta. And so we've actually been working on that, and hopefully sometime soon we'll release our documentary. We went out and actually recreated some scenes with the volcano, and then we also interviewed all of the explorers, and then I spent lots of time talking with Dr. Shormann. He has been kind enough to allow me to use his material to tell people his story. So tonight I would like to say thank you to Dr. David Shormann and for letting us have all of the images in the video. Since I'm a media producer at different times throughout the night, I'm going to play some video clips. I'm also going to play some parts of an audio drama we put together because we took his story and made it into a three-part audio drama. So tonight I'm going to play clips from that. I just want to warn you ahead of time, people don't know what to do with their eyes when there's audio playing, so just be forewarned that every once in a while some audio will play with no video that goes with it, so just do whatever you want to with your eyes. Maybe stare at the screen or something. I don't know. Anyway, let's start off by praying. Dear Father, I pray that you would be with me tonight. Father, please help me to be accurate in my storytelling. Father, I thank you that as Christians that we can take the blinders off and we can look all around us at the world that you have created. And all of the evidence points back to you. Father, I pray tonight that as I speak, that you would help us just again to have an appreciation of what you've done. Father, we just thank you for this opportunity. And Father, I thank you for everyone that gathers together and that the Apologetics Forum exists, Father. God, I thank you for all that you are doing through them. God, we just praise you for that. In the name of your Son, Jesus, amen. Well, for many years, it was talked about, can layers form very quickly, or do layers have to form over a very long period of time? And there was kind of a back and forth with creationists saying, well, it seems like that could be the result of catastrophism, and yet the uniformitarianists want to stick to the story that those take a very long period to be laid down. But something happened in May of 1980 that changed that debate forever. It's amazing the power in the eruption of Mount St Helens. And the lessons that we learn there are just incredibly valuable for creationists. But what if there was a volcano that was 30 times more powerful that hardly anyone knew in the creation movement? And so today I want to tell you that story. It was June 1st, 1912. Earthquakes were beginning to rock a little Indian settlement of Katmai village and the surrounding 100 miles of mostly unpopulated area. Soon, families from this area would flee for their lives. And here's a picture of where Katmai Park is at in Alaska. You can see it's, I guess, southwest of Alaska, close to King Salmon. Late in the evening of the 5th, observers at Cold Bay, 40 miles to the southwest, noticed that the northern sky looked black and stormy, even though the skies were clear on the coast, and that's when something big happened.
I do not know whether we shall be either alive or well. We are awaiting death at any moment. Of course, do not be alarmed. A mountain has burst near here, so that we are covered in ash, in some places 10 feet and 6 feet deep. All this began on the 6th of June. Night and day we light lamps. We cannot see daylight. In a word, it is terrible, and we are expecting death at any moment. And we have no water. All the rivers are covered in ash, just ashes mixed with water. Here are darkness, hell, and thunder, and noise. I do not know whether it is day or night. Vanka will tell you all about it. So kissing and blessing you both. Goodbye.
So that was an actual excerpt written by a native fisherman by the name of Ivan. And on June 6th, the ground started to shake violently. Kodiak Island heard the blast and saw an ash cloud from 100 miles away. Ash fell for 3 days, covering the area. It was said that the darkness was so thick during the day of June the 8th that it was impossible to see a lantern held at arm's length. The ash from the eruption traveled all the way to Algeria, over Europe, over North America, all the way down to Algeria, and it all did it in about 6 days. The people were so freaked out that they didn't know what to do, so the people of Kodiak Island became just paralyzed with fear, and so they went out and they got on a boat and they went out into the ocean and just sat on the boat waiting to see what was going to happen, and they just stayed anchored out there. There was 500 people on board, and there was hardly room to stand or move around. They stood hungry, thirsty, and scared for 2 days on the deck of the ship. They were surrounded in total darkness, hoping to survive, to survive with no idea of what was causing it all. Wow, this was an epic event. People that lived in Juneau, 750 miles away from the volcano, heard the eruption about an hour after it happened. Isn't that cool? It took so long to travel to where they could hear it. Nobody knew what was happening. For 2.5 days, tall, dark columns of ash and poisonous gases spewed into the air. Sulfuric acid rain tarnished brass as far away as Seattle. Back on the peninsula, a river of superheated gases, ash, and dust flowed through the V-shaped valley of Knife Creek, instantly killing all life and flattening the ground into a wide plain. It solidified over a 1,200 square mile area, forming 656 feet thick in some places. Ash snowed across western Canada and several U.S. states. Yeah, so it was an amazing eruption that took place. The first ones that went in after that was the National Geographic, and those were led by a Christian man by the name of Dr. Robert Griggs.
Today I saw a sight no human being has ever laid eyes on. A region in the great Alaskan wilderness laid bare by a volcanic eruption. The utter devastation will make further exploration difficult. My team and I are running low on supplies. This evening I have left base camp alone to do some scouting. I have not seen an animal or any living creature since entering the blast zone. Tomorrow we hope to send an expedition out from the base camp to find Novarupta. I'm overwhelmed by the amazing power of one volcano to completely change the entire landscape. We have pitched our tent away from the danger of avalanche from the rocks rolling off the mountains around us. This is such a harsh environment. I know danger is a constant concern, but we're determined to press on. I hope the words on the pages of this journal inspire future generations to explore this amazing place.
So Dr. Robert Griggs led 3 expeditions from 1915 to 1919. Here's a few pictures from those expeditions. Here's part of his crew. Griggs and his team faced quicksand, high winds, pumice storms, raging rivers, and falling boulders. So this was quite an expedition. They were out in the middle of nowhere, and they were battling it out with the elements. Here's a picture of them and a video of them, the actual team, one of their actual teams that was out there. Here's another picture. Now, one day they were in base camp, and they headed out to do some exploring, and one of the men by the name of Church, he had eaten too many pancakes that day, and so he didn't want to go out for that day's expedition, so he ended up staying behind in base camp. But Dr. Robert Griggs and another man headed out, and they made one of the greatest discoveries of their expeditions.
Should we proceed further, Griggs?
Church is probably wondering if we've been dispatched.
Poor Church, incapacitated by too many pancakes.
At least we had someone to stay back and watch our gear.
I must say that I have been utterly surprised by the lack of volcanic activity that I thought would be manifesting itself in such short order after such a grand eruption.
I would agree, Folsom. Okay, I think we need to get back to where Church is waiting.
All right. The steam we thought we were pursuing has shown itself to be nothing more than clouds.
Wait! Folsom, what do you see down there on the floor of the path?
It appears to be a miniature volcano jetting steam.
The binoculars reveal that you are correct.
What do we do now?
I feel we owe it to Church to turn back. We'll return with him. Okay, follow me back.
Yes, sir. What's wrong, sir?
When I turned back at you, I couldn't help but stare down the valley. Look!
More steam!
I know Church is waiting for us, but he can wait a little longer. Folsom, follow me. Wow! Folsom, look what we've discovered.
The valley's dotted with hundreds.
No, thousands.
Could it be 10,000?
Of fumaroles. It looks as if all the steam engines of the world have been assembled together and have popped their safety valves at once and are letting off a surplus of steam in concert.
Griggs, we need to get down there and have a closer look.
Let's go.
So Dr. Griggs discovered the Valley of 10,000 Smokes on his 1916 expedition. This is an actual quote. The whole valley, as far as the eye could reach, was full of hundreds, no thousands, literally tens of thousands of smokes curling up from its fissured floor. The first glance was enough to assure us that we had stumbled into another Yellowstone Park, unseen and unsuspected by white man and native alike until this hour. I tried to keep my head and observe carefully, yet I exposed 2 films from one of my precious rolls in trying for pictures that I should have known were impossible. It was as though all the steam engines in the world assembled together had popped their safety valves at once and were letting off surplus steam in concert. Here they had found all of this volcanic activity taking place in the Valley of 10,000 Smokes. Here's a picture of some of that volcanic activity. Okay, and here they're trying to determine the temperature of one of those fumaroles. Okay, so we're talking about Novarupta, right? Now, when I first took on doing the documentary for Novarupta, I was so excited about doing this volcano that was 30 times larger than Mount St Helens. And so I contacted Dr. Shormann and said, Dr. Shormann, we need a picture of Novarupta. And when he sent it, I said, no, I mean Novarupta, the volcano. And he goes, Pat, this is Novarupta. Okay, so it's unimpressive looking, but here's a picture that Griggs and his team took while they were there. Now, on one of his expeditions, Dr. Griggs actually took his wife, Laura. Can you imagine going out into the wilderness? And these guys were hardy. It was amazing. And so there they are crossing the river. We're going to talk more about crossing the rivers in just a little bit. Here they are at one of their base camps. Here's Dr. Griggs making some notes. Now, one night they were in a base camp on one of their expeditions, and the wind was blowing so hard that it was starting to rip the camp apart. It was starting to overturn their equipment, and they all felt like they were just going to blow away, and they didn't know what to do, so they decided that they were going to take their chances and run down the valley to try and escape the wind. And so right in the middle of the night, they all took off and headed down the valley. Well, a gust of wind came up that was so strong that it literally picked Dr. Griggs up off the ground, carried him down, and dropped him back off into the pumice, and he survived and was fine. So it was just an incredible adventure that these guys had. Eventually, when they worked their way back to the base camp, this is what it looked like. Well, when you're out there and you've got to take care of food and all that, where do you cook your food? Well, the fumaroles, of course. A landslide triggered by earthquakes during the 1912 eruption dammed the Katmai River and Katmai Canyon. The Katmai River remained dammed for 3 years until a very heavy snowmelt, in 1915. And then the dam was breached and an enormous flood broke out into Katmai Canyon. Later, that dam broke and released enough water to move 33 million cubic yards of material in a matter of hours. Wow, you know how some creationists talk about the breached dam idea for Grand Canyon? And of course, we don't know if that's really the answer or not, right? The geologists are still trying to figure that out. But we have this breached dam idea that there was a bunch of water that was dammed up behind a natural dam, and then that broke, causing this very rapid flood which carved Grand Canyon. Well, it's a great theory, and guess what? At Katmai, or there at Novarupta, it actually happened. There was a breached dam, they took the pictures and all of that, and then they documented what happened when that dam broke, and it actually carved that huge valley that's there in Novarupta. And so it's fun that we've got this theory as creationists, and yet here we've got an actual example of that taking place at a real site. So it's kind of interesting. A great volume of debris was also transported during this event. The tidal flat area, 6 miles wide, was choked up with pumice and ash, turning upriver stretches of land into quicksand and destroying Katmai village. It was gone after that. Okay, trees were snapped off near the ground level for several miles by the violent impact of the water. A fan of huge boulders was deposited at the mouth of the canyon, and the water volume was so great that it flooded the valley to a depth of approximately 10 feet. So that's the flood that took place there at Katmai as a result of a breached dam. Okay, here's their expeditions were a success, and they achieved all kinds of wonderful things. Here's what the president of National Geographic had to say. Their intrepid, intelligent, and faithful services achieved results of historic value and reflect great credit on all participants. Again, just a great success. Dr. Griggs wrote about his adventures in this book, The Valley of 10,000 Smokes. By the way, you can find this online and download it for free if you would like to. So that is the story of Dr. Robert Griggs. Are you guys ready to travel in time with me? 100 years later, here we go. There you go, a time warp. Here's Dr. David Shormann. Dr. David Shormann has his Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering. He has a Master of Science in Marine Chemistry. He has a PhD in limnology, which is the study of both, the chemical and physical attributes of different bodies of water and how it affects biology living in it. He's also the founder of DIVE, which is an interactive educational program. You can search for that online. And he's also an explorer. He would love to go to Katmai Park all of the time, and he would take a bunch of young men with him, including his stepson Kenny, and they would go salmon fishing all of the time. And one time they were at the Katmai National Park Visitor Center, and what they did was they found Dr. Griggs' book. And he began to thumb through the book, and he was interested in it, and so he went home and found it on Google and downloaded it and actually read through the book, and he began to realize this has huge creationist implications. And so since he was already taking fishing trips to Katmai, by the way, they were living in Texas at the time, he decided that he was going to lead an expedition to Novarupta, that he was going to follow in the very footsteps of Dr. Robert Griggs. And so he assembled his team of young men that he liked to fish with, and they decided to head out on an expedition in 2009. Matter of fact, here was the plan, was that they were going to go with the young men, but Kenny, his stepson, and Dr. Shormann were going to head out on the first wave, and then the other young men had some kind of an appointment that they had to make, and so they were going to be following behind them a day later, and they were going to meet out there at some geological cabins that are close to Novarupta, and they were going to go out there and document the eruption and take pictures and come back and use that information to build people's faith. So here's a picture. Whoa. There's a picture of them heading out on their 2009 expedition. That's Dr. Shormann and his stepson Kenny. Here's some of the team members. On the left there is Kenny, who's Dr. Shormann's son. Joel, who's an accomplished explorer. Next to him in the middle there is Mike, and he was a seasoned leader who had accompanied Dr. Shormann on other adventures. John, next to him is his son. And then there's, by the way, Mike had just recently broken his back and healed from that. And they were about to head out onto this expedition, right? And then Tommy, who just loved the thrill of adventure. So there's the team right there. Again, Dr. Shormann and Kenny were going to head out first, and then the other gentlemen were going to be following behind them a day later. So there's a picture of Dr. Shormann and Kenny out in the wilderness there. Just so you get an idea of where this is at, there's a picture again of where they're headed to. Now, they had to fly into King Salmon, and then they fly, and then the next place they headed to was Katmai Park. Now, Katmai Park is the place where, have you seen that salmon jumping into the bear's mouth? Yeah. That's Katmai Park, okay? So they spent their first night at Brooks Lodge, which is there at Katmai. And then they began to hike out into the wilderness on their way to the actual Novarupta event. They spent their first night along the Buttress mountain range. Along their way, they had to cross several different rivers. So there they are crossing a river. Now, Kenny said that this was the thing that he hated the most because the rivers were freezing cold. And a lot of times they had to hold their gear above their head. And times the currents were so strong they were afraid that they were just going to get knocked down and that they were just going to get washed down the river immediately. The other thing that they had a fear of is you'll notice that he's got a stick that he's using, and the reason they've got a stick is because it could drop off all of a sudden. And if they're walking along and it drops off, the river would just sweep them right on downstream. And so he said that that was his least favorite part of the expedition, was crossing the rivers. Well, as they crossed the rivers, Dr. Shormann was thinking a lot about the stream power law. This equation is used by many scientists to determine the age of a stream or river. It takes into account the rate of erosion, the hardness of the material the stream is flowing through, the size of its drainage area, and the slope of the water flowing. Supposedly, using this equation, scientists can figure out how long a river's been cutting through its riverbed. Okay, so that's uniformitarian ideas, right? When we look at the Colorado River going through the Grand Canyon, we determine all of those different factors, and then we can try and decide how long that river's been going through the canyon. Well, as Dr. Shormann was looking at that, he was thinking about these things. Dr. Robert Griggs had discovered the river, the Lathe River, and it had cut 100-foot deep canyons in 5 years. So it cut 100 feet in 5 years. That's a rate of 20 feet per year. However, this rate is nowhere near that today, and so when Dr. Shormann was there, he saw that the erosion was happening much less. It was happening much slower, and so here's just another evidence of where catastrophism does things much faster than the processes that we see in the present. And so that's one of the things that they were thinking about. Okay, here they are. Boy, they worked out. No, big old boulders of pumice. Now, that pumice is fun. Let me show you the pumice that's not so fun.
Hang on.
As I talked to Kenny and Dr. Shormann, they said usually what was happening was they would be hiking along and they would hear a sound that sounded like a freight train way up ahead of them, and they knew that once they heard the freight train sound, they probably had about 3 minutes. And here they're taking pictures of each other. That was probably a very light one, because most of the time when they heard that sound, they knew they had 3 minutes, and then they would fall face down on the pumice and just cover themselves, because that pumice starts to take off parts of your skin. It destroys your equipment. It rips your gear. And so they would just lay it flat down, and they would wait till the storm would go by, and then they would get back up and they would start walking, and then not too much longer they would hear that freight train again, and then they would fall back down on their faces and they would just sit there. And so that's what it was like trudging through that pumice and through those storms. Well, eventually they arrived at the beautiful USGS cabins that they got to stay at. Beautiful. Here's what it looks like on the inside. Meanwhile, the rest of their team was back at the Buttress Mountains spending the night. These mountains are 3,356 feet above sea level, and that's where the rest of the team was. The next morning, Kenny and Dr. Shormann actually got up and hiked to the actual Novarupta event. I'm sorry, I keep pushing too many buttons on this remote. Okay, so here's Novarupta. There's the lava dome that's capped the vent there, and there's Kenny walking around that. Here's another picture of that. Okay, there are 700 feet thick volcanic deposits around the vent, and most of them happened in the first 16 hours of the eruption. While here, Dr. Shormann and Kenny picked up a sample of rhyolite rock to have sampled. Who's that remind you of? It's what Dr. Austin did at Mount St Helens, right? Dr. Shormann wanted to repeat the experiment, so he plucked that rhyolite from the lava dome. And what was fun is he had it tested exactly 100 years after the eruption, and he did it that way on purpose because he was celebrating the 100th birthday of Novarupta. Okay, so the eruption was in 1912. They got the sample in 2009. They sent it to the lab in 2012, exactly 100 years after the eruption. It was the New Mexico Geochronological Research Lab that dated it using the argon method. Okay, so if the assumption of zero initial argon were true, then the sample should have virtually no daughter argon produced in the decay of the radioactive potassium, right? So there should be no daughter product. It had 3.6% argon, which translates into ages of 5.5 million years old. How old was the rock? 100 years old. The test was wrong by a factor of 55,000 times. That is way off. So it's kind of fun that he got to repeat that experiment and come up with similar results to what Dr. Austin did. Okay, here's a picture of the team in the cabin. They finally came together after they were at the vent. They came back, and by that time, the rest of the team had joined them at at the luxurious cabin that they were staying at there. Here they are just hanging out, throwing snowballs, practicing their little ice glissading and all of that type of stuff while they were there. Okay, I promised you romance, right? Kenny left a girl behind, and she was actually living in Hawaii, and he really felt that this was the right girl. Well, they had a satellite phone in case of an emergency, right? I mean, you're out in the middle of nowhere. If something goes wrong, you want to get a hold of somebody to get medics or somebody in there, right? And so they had the satellite phone. Well, the responsibility of that phone had been assigned to Kenny, and you already see this coming. They only had so many minutes, right? Well, Kenny would sneak away while the rest of the team was doing things like this, and he would call Ashley back home. Here's a picture of Ashley. He would call Ashley, and he spent time talking with her, sneaking the phone calls. And then one time, he realized he had burnt all of the minutes of their sat phone. He didn't tell the rest of the team, and he was just praying that they never needed the satellite phone. Okay, here they are now, the whole team returning back to Novarupta. Okay, so I thought I would go through with you all of the different events that actually took place during the eruption, okay? The eruption took place in there we go. You can join me on this slide. Oops. Pushed a bad button there. Okay, the eruption took place in 60 hours, which would have been divided into 5 different episodes, and so I thought I would just roll through those with you. Episode 1 lasted for 16 hours and accounted for 70% of the material that would be ejected. Okay, so Mount Katmai is 6 miles east of the Novarupta vent, and at 1 o'clock in the afternoon of June 6, 1912, some of the material that began to erupt at Mount Katmai. So Mount Katmai was the actual volcano that was actually erupting, okay? Here you can see a picture of the eruption taking place. Here's Mount Katmai here. So I guess my little laser pointer is not working. So there's Mount Katmai. Under the extreme pressure, the material began to blow out a lower vent, Novarupta, as the pressure was relieved from underneath Katmai at the top of that mountain. As the top of that mountain collapsed down inside itself, there was a cubic mile of material that fell 1,000 feet into the void. So basically, Katmai began to erupt. As it's erupting, all of a sudden it collapses in on itself, it plugs itself up, and it all shoots out the lower vent of Novarupta. And that's why when you look at Novarupta, it doesn't look that impressive as a volcano is. It was just kind of a makeshift volcano. During this episode, it deposited 9 distinct deposits filling the valley of 10,000 smokes. It caused flows moving at the speeds of 400 miles per hour. It began with rhyolite material and eventually began releasing dacite. It was about 6 hours into this episode when Mount Katmai collapsed, releasing mud flows, ash, and a hydrothermal rock matrix. During the first 11 hours of the eruption, there was 567 tons of material ejected from Novarupta's vent every second. At the end of episode 1, there was a short pause of a few hours. Episode 2 was a Plinian eruption shooting gas and dacite material high up into the air. Although there were earthquakes throughout the entire eruption, the largest took place during episode 2, hitting a 7 on the Richter scale. It blew out almost 3 cubic miles of material, which covered an area of 3,000 square miles. Whoa. This event also caused pyroclastic density currents, waves of fast-moving gas-carrying rock that shot downward at high speeds and deposited layer after layer of material. After a short break, episode 3 shot another 6/10 of a cubic mile of material straight up into the air to fall back, creating even more layers. It also shot out more waves of gas and also material. This episode ended as material built up around Novarupta's vent, and it formed a plug which ended that episode. Episode number 4 blew out the plug and deposited the material around the vent. And then finally, episode number 5 was another dome building event which replaced the dome and ended the eruption. Pretty awesome. So, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. When we read in Genesis about the flood, it seems like there was some kind of volcanic activity taking place. We've got the fountains of the deep opening up, and we think that that played a large part in the flood. Like most volcanoes, Novarupta released a lot of water during the eruption. It was millions of tons of water. Also, prior to erupting, it was likely in a state known as the supercritical phase. The critical point for water is 705.2 degrees Fahrenheit with a pressure of 3,191 pounds per square inch. At high pressures and temperatures like this, water no longer acts like a liquid or a gas, but something in between. Near this critical point, it becomes very corrosive and can actually eat through rock. It was probably the corrosiveness of supercritical water that helped eat away the material inside Katmai Peak, aiding to its collapse during the eruption. The effects of water and other products bursting forth from Novarupta could be similar to what was happening with the fountains of the great deep during the worldwide flood. So again, these volcanoes are teaching us things about what was happening during the flood. Okay, the next few days were spent taking day trips, climbing Mount Katmai, exploring glaciers, and visiting the original base camp where Griggs was at, next to Base Mountain. So they got to explore all around there. Here you can see some of the guys were practicing their ice picking. There you go. Oh. Okay, Bake Mountain is 3,500 feet and 1,000 feet above the valley. So the team went there and visited Baked Mountain, and while they were there, what did they find on top? They found marine fossils, right? And so it just reminds us what the Bible says, that 15 cubits upward did the waters prevail and the mountains were covered. We find marine fossils on just about every mountain everywhere, don't we? And it was true with what they did too. Reminds us of what it says in Psalm 104, 6 through 9. Thou coverest it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At thy rebuke they fled. At the voice of thy thunder they hastened away. They go up by the mountains. They go down by the valleys. Unto the place which thou hast founded for them. Thou hast set a bound that they may not pass over, that they turn not again to cover the earth. And so as we look at things like this, we think, many creation researchers believe that these verses are describing post-flood actions with the mountains rising up and uplift happening not too long after the flood. And so those are some of the ways that we can explain things like what we found on Baked Mountain there. Okay, here's the team again crossing a river. You can see that they've got to jump over this, and that doesn't look so scary, but imagine if you slipped and fell into that, and the current could just wash you down the stream. So the guys started to make their way back to Katmai Park again. And as they were going, they kept crossing these rivers. As they crossed the river Lathe, they were surrounded by the layers deposited by the eruption. Many of these layers are known as valley-filling ignimbrite. And ignimbrite is a term for a volcanic material like rhyolite that's trapped in hot gases as they rapidly flow outward from an eruption. Ignimbrites are by far the scariest of all volcanic vents. Rhyolite never forms lava flows like the basaltic flows of Hawaii because it's too sticky. But when rhyolite magma at depth sufficiently dissolved by water, and then that water suddenly flashes into steam, the whole mass undergoes an instant explosion like a bomb. And so those are some of the forces that we see working there. Once the energized material exited the vent, some of it formed into a ground-hugging slurry of hot gas, vapor, and ash that flowed at terrific speeds. While it traveled outward from the blast, water in the ash particles continued to expand, keeping the whole mass energized. So ignimbrites can cover incredible distances, even across water, bodies of water, in no time whatsoever. So here you can see the different layers that were formed, why they were there. Novarupta deposits consist of two main types, fall deposits and flow deposits. The valley-filling ignimbrites are flow deposits that poured out of Novarupta's vent. In some places along the river Leith, these 9 ignimbrite packages, which Greg's called sand flows, are actually over 100 feet thick. Some of the layers are very soft, sandstone-like rock that you can crumble in your hands. By the way, this is the only ignimbrite flow that's ever been recorded in human history. There at Novarupta. Some of these materials were so hot the particles were actually melted together, which is called welded ignimbrite. So the heat was just incredible that was going on during all of this time. The other deposits were fall deposits. They're composed of ash and pumice, mainly from Novarupta, but they also include a special deposit called a HEPI deposit. That stands for high energy proximal ignimbrite. HEPIs are a type of pyroclastic density current formed after superheated clouds of gas and ash collapse on themselves and rush across the surrounding valley and mountains. HEPI deposits blanket everything in their path with thin layers that frequently stack up to several feet in thickness. It's amazing to know that such finely layered deposits can be formed so rapidly. So again, we're seeing the same thing that we saw at Mount St Helens, right? As we're seeing these materials deposited very quickly, and they're these thin layers that if a uniformitarianist didn't know about the eruption, they would come back and count those as being a long period of time that those took to deposit. Doesn't seem so far-fetched to consider a year-long global cataclysm causing an average of a mile thick of sediment layers around the world. When we look at Novarupta, we see the layers can form very fast in just minutes. We see rapid erosion carving canyons like at the River Leith. We see massive landslides damming rivers and mountains collapsing. It demonstrates the power of high-energy, short-term events like what happened here at Novarupta. Okay, so eventually the team made it back down to the park, and one of the things that they did was they took a tour with one of the rangers, and they went to a place called Ucac Falls. Now, Ucac Falls, they actually came across the layer that they had been seeing throughout their journey, which is called the Naknek Formation. And basically, the Naknek Formation stretches from the Alaskan range in the east all the way past the Pribilof Islands to the Bering Sea, over 1,000 miles. So here's this huge deposit. It's over 14,000 feet thick in some areas. This deposit is said to be comprised of rapidly eroding coastal sediments mixed with a considerable volume of volcanic debris. So here we've got this water-deposited layer that's 12,000 feet thick. The Naknek is a sediment gravity flow that occurs when water mixes with sediment. In a sediment gravity flow, the entire mass of particles and liquid behaves as a single fluid. This amount of material can be moved by these flows, and it shows that it's catastrophic in nature, and it speaks of a gigantic force of water. Dr. Shormann concludes that these layers are from the worldwide flood. So here we've got this huge Naknek formation, water deposited, that obviously looks like it was flood deposited layers that were there. We've also found a large concentration of marine fossils in that layer as well. I've got to slow down. My mouth is getting all tangled up. All right, well, they finally left their expedition. They had an awesome time. They took a lot of pictures. They took a lot of notes. Dr. Shormann would return and write all of that up into a scientific paper. By the way, I got that scientific paper, and I'll give it to Dr. Lyklama, and he can put it on the Apologetics Forum website, so you guys can actually download it. And if you want all the technical information, you can. So, you think this is the end of the story, but it's not! Because that was only the 2009. I hope some of you aren't going, oh my goodness. I'll talk about this one very shortly, okay? And this is the one with more romance to it, okay? Now, remember that Kenny had run out the minutes on the sat phone. Matter of fact, when they were done with their expedition, they met at Moose's Tooth Pizza, and he confessed to the team that he had used up all the minutes on the sat phone, and they couldn't believe that he had done it. But I want to tell you that it was minutes on that sat phone used up very wisely, because later on he proposed to Ashley, and they were married in Hawaii. Woo! Well, Dr. Shormann after a while said, well, it's great that we got to go to Novarupta, but I want to go to the backside of Novarupta, and no man has been there since Dr. Robert Griggs, and he decided that he wanted to go to that backside to document some more of what took place during the eruption. And so this time they put together a team of only 3. Dr. Shormann, Kenny, and his new wife, Ashley. This happened not too long after they were married, and so here they are going on an incredible trip together. There they are getting into the seaplane. Now, the seaplane was supposed to land on Dakavac Lake. Now, Dakavac Lake was a larger lake than Katmai Lake, and the reason they had to land there was because there was enough, the lake was big enough that the seaplane could make it for the landing with all of the weight and also be able to take off. Well, Dr. Shormann had put a tracker on so that his wife and younger daughter could track them from home in Texas to kind of watch their movement as they were going. And she knew the plan day by day where they were going to be. And they knew that they were going to be landing in Dakavac Lake. Well, at the last minute, the pilot realized that he wanted to chance it and go for a landing in Katmai Lake, which is a little bit shorter than Dakavac Lake, but he figured that without the extra weight of the extra passengers, he'd be able to land there and be able to take off there. So they actually successfully landed at Katmai Lake instead of Dakavac. But back home, they were watching the tracker, and they saw that it had gone to the wrong place. And so the little daughter began to wonder, was it a crash, an accident that happened? And then as the tracker started to move, she began to wonder if maybe a bear had eaten the tracker. And so that's what was going on back home. Meanwhile, they were doing just great. They had landed at Katmai Park. Before they departed the plane, they made plans to be picked back up at Dakavac Lake. And Dr. Shormann said to the pilot, "How do you get from Katmai to Dakavac?" And the pilot laughed. Nobody's ever done that before. And there was no data available, there was no maps, there was no GPS information. Nobody had ever gone that direction before, and so that's what they were going to have to do on the second expedition that they took. Okay, so one of Dr. Shormann's goals was to demonstrate the creation, flood, ice age, and present pattern that he expected to see there at Novarupta based on his biblical history. To accomplish this, they were going to spend 4 days exploring Katmai Valley, Mount Katmai, and then also Noisy Mountain. Oops. Okay, the float plane landed on Katmai Lake. I just explained that. Okay, there they are jogging. Wow. That's commitment. So the first night they spent there at Katmai Lake. They came to the same place Dr. Griggs had been when he documented the natural dam breach that carved a Katmai Canyon. So they got to actually go out and take some pictures of that canyon. There's the canyon that was carved by that breach dam. That's a 400-foot deep canyon left behind. What's running through it? The Katmai River. I've been talking to people about this all this week. What comes first, the stream or the canyon? Well, we've been taught, right, that the stream carves the canyon, but in fact, usually from what we can see in modern times, it's the canyon that gets carved first, and then it leaves the stream running through it, and that's exactly what happened there at Novarupta. So there they are in their honeymoon suite. Okay, here's some of the layers that they took pictures of, and they documented this. Now, it's really cool. Dr. Shormann actually believes that there's some basement rocks there at Novarupta. And then on top of that is the Naknek Formation, which we talked about being flood layers, right? And then on top of that is some glacial till. And then on top of that is those ignimbrite packages that we talked about that came out of Novarupta. And so imagine what we've got right there at Novarupta. We've got the entire world history right there in one little geologic column right there at Novarupta. We've got creation, we've got flood, we've got ice age, and we've got present-day catastrophic processes all taking place right there in that one little spot up there at Novarupta. Okay, here again is Katmai. Now, they were going to climb Katmai, and they were super excited about it, but Ashley had some boots, some new boots, and what do you do when you have new boots? You break them in. What did Ashley not do before the trip? She didn't break them in, and it was just rubbing her legs raw, and so that day they decided not to hike up Katmai. So they split ways. Dr. Shormann went off to explore the Princess Glacier, and they decided to cross the river to get back to their base camp.
This is a completely different section of the river than we crossed before.
I know, but look how much narrower it is here. Are you willing to give it a try?
I'll do it. I want to get back to camp and get warm and out of these boots.
Me too. Okay, make sure to use your poles. I don't want you falling into any pits. Okay, let's go together. 1, 2, 3. Whoa! Oh wow, that's really cold.
I didn't think it was possible, but somehow it's even colder than last time.
Let's get across fast.
Okay.
Ashley!
I'm in above my waist. Kitty, oh please, I can't make it across this.
It's so deep, and the current's running too fast. Don't let it wash you downstream. Here, grab my hand. Let's get back to shore.
I feel as if the wind's knocked out of me. It's hard to breathe.
Me too, but come on. We can make it back together. Come on, together. We can do this. Just a little further.
Kenny, I can't feel my legs anymore. Can you?
No, but don't think about it. We're almost back to shore. Come on, 3 more steps. 2. Okay, hop onto the bank.
I'm so tired.
Me too. Let's rest for a second, and then we need to find another spot to cross.
So that day they didn't make it across the river, and they realized that they had to go and find another place where that they could cross. And then eventually they headed back to their base camp. Well, while there, they went out and documented just like I showed you. They took pictures of the different layers that were there. They took a lot of data down, and Dr. Shormann used that to put that together in his scientific paper. Again, I encourage you to check that out if you would like to know more. Well, now it was coming the time where they had to get back to Dakavak Lake, and remember, nobody knew how to do that, and so they started off on their journey, and they began to head out on this one ridge that they thought would get them to the lake, and they hiked all day, and as they were hiking, they were starting to get out of the just having all of the barren rocks around, and all of a sudden they were into all of these aspen trees. Matter of fact, the aspen trees became so thick that they were trying to squeeze through them to get through the aspen trees, and they struggled and struggled all day long, a lot of times going up and over ridges and all of that type of stuff, and finally they got to one point only to realize that there was no way they could get to the lake from that. And so they had to struggle all the way back down through those trees again, and they began to start to worry that they were going to miss their flight out, that the seaplane would come and land at Dakavak, see that they weren't there, and then miss their ride out. And so it was starting to get dangerous. So they started out again and began to go again and continued to fight their way through. And of course, the end of the story is they made it just a matter of hours before the plane actually got to them. And there's a picture of Dr. Shormann and Kenny and Ashley there. By the way, one of the things I should mention is this was Ashley's first camping trip. No, they go all the time now. Matter of fact, it's so cute. They've got 2 twin boys now, and they are adventure hounds. They love to get out and do adventure. Well, the whole purpose of the trip was to document evidence that shows that layers could form very rapidly, that canyons could be carved very quickly, also to document the breach dam and what that did, and also to show the pattern of creation, flood, ice age, and present-day processes, and that's exactly what they documented. And so what was the importance of this trip? Well, instead of me telling you, I would love for them to tell you.
I think if others were to have the same experience as we did in Novarupta, I think that it would strengthen their relationship with God as far as being able to be out in creation and see His power and see that the evidence of what He says really is true, and that just there's something about being out there that I think, you put a lot of trust in Him, and it really draws you closer to Him.
Yeah, I think after hiking through Novarupta, things that I've learned that'll help me in the future is to have patience and to just trust yourself and trust God and know that He's in control, and that you don't need to worry about the little things, that if you trust that it will all work out and we'll all be okay.
I think it's important for Christians to know about Novarupta because it's a great example of the power of God. And we read in Matthew 22:29, Jesus told the Sadducees, He told them they were in error because they did not know Scripture very well and they did not know the power of God. And so, we need to study Scripture, but we also need to study His creation and get to know Him better that way. And so it's just an incredible testimony. The biggest eruption in over 100 years now, and there's just so much power that goes with an event like that, and that can only be possible by a more powerful being in charge of all of that.
And that's the story of the journey to Novarupta. Thank you.
Do some Q&A. Yeah. Well, thank you, Pat. That was a lot of useful information there. We've, on the Washington here, of course, we have two examples, Mount St Helens and then the Missoula flood in the central Washington, evidence of creation in the flood. And we know about the Grand Canyon, and now we know about Novarupta. So thank you for that. So we're going to take some time for Q&A. So if you have a question, put up your hand and I'll come around so you can say it, and we can get that all recorded as well. And while you think of your question, let me remind you the way we support this ministry is we take a free will offering here, and the men will come around in a few minutes to do that. And if you're more comfortable just putting it in the donation box, that's fine too. So if you have a question.
Okay, I've got to do a quick disclaimer. I'm a media guy. Keep that in mind. If you ask about Ignum Bright packages, I'm going to say Dr. Shormann's got a great paper on that. So just keep that in mind.
Hi, you said there were 5 events?
Yes.
I think of St. Helens going up, and each event to me was when I'm out on the softball field and I see it erupting again. So what do you mean by event? Was it all, what was the distance? What was the time between each event?
Yeah, a lot of times it was just a matter of hours. So in other words, one of those big events would happen, and then usually it would end with a plug forming, and then it would stop and be quiet. Next event would blow the plug back out, and it would go again. So that's a matter of hours is usually what was in between.
Were they all just a matter of hours, or were there days?
No, I believe it was all matters of hours. I don't believe that there were days in between. So it's not like Mount St. Helens where it was May 18th and then June 12th, and no, it was a matter of hours.
So again, raise your hand if you have a question.
Okay, now I'm not even sure about the question, but the rhyolite that was sent to be dated
Yes.
was 100 years old, but it was 100 years old when it was pushed up by the volcano, right?
Right.
Did it exist as rock before it was magma pushed up? I'm wondering, does that play a part in dating the rocks? I'm a young Earth creationist, but the potassium argon half-life was, so I guess I'm confused. So it was 100 years old above the surface, but can we date it from when it was?
Right, okay, so I'm going to give you Pat, the media director's answer, and then I'm going to have the nuclear physicist give you the answer. You know, it's very interesting because we see this happening over and over again where we know how old the rock is and we date it, and it turns out to be much older, but they're not actually getting dates. What they're doing is they're measuring isotope, right? So that's what's going on. Well, very interesting that his rock turned out to be so old. Dr. Austin's rock turned out to be very old, and we've actually seen a bunch of other places where those rocks are taken from from different volcanoes like that and are just much older, right? So remember what they're doing is they're measuring that ratio of isotopes. Right, the parent-daughter, right? And so according to their ideas, after it comes up as magma and is released, that it shouldn't contain any daughter product in it, and yet not long after that happens, they're actually finding quite a bit of daughter product in there.
They're not allowing for the change, the pressure, the melting, coming up. I mean, in other words, that rock has gone through a lot of changes that we're really not accounting for. We're just going by the parent-daughter ratio, which could be completely different after it goes through those processes.
Well, so what's going wrong? So we know the three assumptions, right? The one assumption is that we knew what the parent-daughter was like at the very beginning, right? I personally, as the media guy, which has no bearing on anything, probably think that that's probably one of the biggest assumptions going on, right? Because how can you get a rock that's already got daughter product in it when it's not supposed to, right? The other one is that the rate remains constant all the time. And then the other one is that there's no contamination, right? Well, to me, it's interesting that we're taking these young volcanic rocks and sending them off to labs, and they've already got daughter product present in them, which is throwing off their interpretation of what the age is. Okay, that was the media guy's answer. Here's the...
Well, actually, you stole my answer from Wednesday night, because I gave that answer as well, and you said it. I mean, we don't know how much of the daughter product was in that sample before, and we don't know if or how much contamination there was of the sample with its surroundings, and then the rate of decay as well. You know, those are some unknowns. And what you covered Wednesday night too is the fact if you take different rocks within that same volcano environment, you get different ages. How can that be? So it just shows you the inaccuracy of that measurement.
Right now, something that Dr. Shormann said, and maybe Dr. Laiklama, maybe you can even answer this, because while we were shooting some of the scenes for the upcoming documentary that we're doing, he and I were walking along the trail, and he had just got the information back from the lab. I think the very week that he was with us out filming. By the way, we filmed out in Alaskan National Volcanic Park, which looks a lot like Novarupta in some places. So as we were walking, he had just gotten the results back just a few days before he joined us out there. He said, Pat, it was really interesting because they wanted to know my estimate of the age of the rock before they would date it. And when I started asking questions about it, it's because they needed to know how long to heat the rock during the testing process. And he said the age that I was going to give them the estimate on would determine how long the heating process would take place for the dating that they did. Now, I don't completely understand that, but that's one of the things that he told me out on the trail there. And I thought, wow, isn't that amazing that he has to give them an idea ahead of time so they know better how to perform the test. And wow, isn't that really just kind of biasing the test?
Yeah, well, as you know, it's also they're reluctant to give the tester too much information, because if you tell them, I'm a creationist, I want you to date this rock, you know, they're very reluctant to do that because the answers they get back are not what they expect.
I'm a little confused on where the water comes in. You brought that in with the fountains of the deep, and are you equating the opening of the fountains to the deep to underwater volcanoes? And then how does the water play into the eruption in the mixing? Where is that water coming from? I lost you there.
Okay, so during an eruption, one of the greatest components of every eruption, from what I understand, is a lot of water is also coming out as well. And so, right, that's what I understand from talking to Dr. Shormann. And so, again, that's in his paper, but that's something I discussed with him at length. Again, I'm a lay person, but he seemed to indicate that there was a lot of water that also came out during the eruption as well. So when we talk about the fountains of the great deep, we're trying to understand basically what the scriptures are saying there. So I know a lot of creation geologists have said that probably that was a lot of volcanic vents that were venting out both magma and probably also a lot of water. And then you've got that magma hitting the cold ocean water and then also creating these superheated steam plumes that were releasing water up into the atmosphere. So That's my understanding. I don't know if that's answering your question at all.
The other one, Pat, you may, I don't know the answer to this. What kind of lakes were in that environment? Like in Mount St Helens, there was Spirit Lake. Were there a number of lakes involved in this as well?
You know, I don't recall that he mentioned any lakes that were involved in that.
Well, because you showed pictures with lakes in there.
Yeah, I've got to be honest, I do not know.
Okay.
The one mountain with the M.
Katmai?
Katmai, yeah.
It's got an M in there.
Well, you showed a picture. It's a lake now.
Right.
So was there a lake there before?
I don't believe there was. I think you probably had a peak, and then it collapsed, leaving the crater. Can't say crater and creator. Okay, so it left the crater, and then that filled with the water.
Okay, so it would be more along the lines of, I think, was it last year they discovered that great big fountain under the ocean floor, big lake underneath the ocean floor? It would be more of an earthquake and a magnet coming up through that water?
Yeah, I don't know about that one, the story.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't either.
The other, I don't know if you know, Mount St Helens, we know that, a third of the height of the mountain was kicked off. And how much was erased in this eruption?
You know, I don't know off the top of my head, but in his paper he talks about that. But yeah, it lost quite a bit of elevation when it collapsed in like that. It was a much higher peak.
Yeah.
And again, Novarupta is so unimpressive when you look at it, right? Because it was not the volcano, but the volcano plugged. And then all of a sudden there's this vent that shoots out 6 miles away.
Yeah. So we'll get that paper on the website, and that'll answer some of these questions.
Yes. That'll be good.
This may seem like kind of a stupid question, but is Novarupta still active?
Is Novarupta still active? I don't believe that it's active right now. There's not anything going on right now with it.
You know, St. Helens is active, and Mount Rainier and Mount Baker and all of those, they haven't erupted certainly in my lifetime, but I mean,
right.
they're still considered active.
Yeah. Right, yeah. I don't know. I have not heard of any activity there.
It is, as you can see by the map, it's in that rim of fire along the Pacific coast. So those are all susceptible to volcanoes, you know.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask the same question I asked Wednesday, but just in case other people are still wondering. The new rock you talk about, and I asked you before the meeting tonight, is that just from lava that in the core of the earth that was never solid rock before, and then in the eruption solidified? Is that what you're considering new rock then?
Right, so once it's liquefied, right, under the pressures that are going on, and then once that erupts, and then it solidifies, as far as I understand, according to them, it's not supposed to have daughter product at that time.
Well, yeah, the daughter-parent thing is kind of confusing, but just yes or no. But if it picked up rock that was already rock and mixed together, I can understand. Is that kind of the daughter-parent relationship then?
Well, Dr. Lyklama, I guess this is something, and you're getting out of the media guy's expertise, right? But to me, it seems like if as soon as that solidifies, I would love to see a creationist grab something that just solidified and have it dated, right? Because I would suspect that it would be containing daughter product right from the very beginning, because that seems to be what we're finding over and over again, is that 6-year-old rocks, 100-year-old rocks are containing daughter product, right? Which they interpret to be as the millions of years, right? So it's not that the rock is millions of years old, it's just that it's already got a ratio of parent to daughter material going on inside the rock.
Well, and I think that's why they get different answers when they try to date different rocks from the same volcano. I mean, how much is involved in the original? So that's why it's so inaccurate trying to do a testing of age that way.
Right.
So a parent rock would be solid form until the eruption.
Yeah.
Well, remember the rock cycle, because you've got other rock, right, that is becoming liquefied and then being re-released again, right? So we've got the rocks.
Yeah,
cycle going on, right?
it's a spectrum, and that's why you get these different answers.
I'm just trying to grasp the idea
Yeah.
in the late term.
Yeah.
He's
Yeah.
actually asking about potassium to argon. It's a half. That's what he's trying to understand is what's the parent-daughter ratio. That's what he's asking is how long it takes half of potassium to turn into argon. That's right. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm trying to make it simpler than
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's a complicated question because of the spectrum of contents. Yeah.
I understand that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's bring this Q&A to an end, and then Pat will be available at his table to take some more questions. So let's thank Pat.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
And just to end up here, some of you may, Pat and Sandy and their two daughters, they've been involved in this ministry for more than 25 years. They live in Vancouver, Washington, not Vancouver, BC. But what you don't know, they're renting a place there, but about a year ago they moved from Paradise, California. And it turns out they still have a house there that they were renting out. And of course, their tenants can't stay there right now. And their house is still standing. And there's, I think, 3 houses in that area that are still standing. And there is a few across the road are standing, but most of the houses in Paradise are gone, as you know. So they're dealing with a very complicated situation. So you might just prayer for them. So I want to remind you that, and just again on Pat and Sandy, I just want to thank them for their ministry here. They actually met with 4 different homeschool groups, and there are amongst those there are more than 150 kids involved, a very good audience. And this morning we also brought them to the 2 Christian schools in the area, Grace Academy and Arlington Christian School. And between the 2, there's more than 150 students again. And between the 2 churches here and in Lake Stevens, Calvary Chapel, we have more than 150 between those 2 churches. So they've reached an audience of 450, 500 people here. So we just thank you for that, because getting the message on creation is so very important, particularly for our youth. Pat was involved in that company you mentioned, Genesis Apologetics. He worked for them. He produced some of the material that you saw last time he was here 2 years ago on debunking evolution, showing that evolution is not true. The company has now come out with a mobile app that you can download on your phone and ask questions that you want answers to, and you can get them on that mobile app. I've loaded on my phone, and you can get your questions answered there. So you might, young people in particular, load it up on your phone. How to do that is on the website, but I'll send an email just to educate people how to get that app. So very, very important to get answers to questions out to the youth. I want to remind you, all these lectures are recorded. They are archived on our website. And there are people listening to this on live streaming as well. So if you can't be here sometime, or you have friends or family someplace in other cities and they want to hear some of these lectures, they're all recorded on our website, and they're available on the Friday night. Other things, the meetings coming up. Of course, this is the last meeting for this year. All the meetings coming up, there are flyers provided on our website. And the flyers for the immediate meetings are on the back table there. And if you're not, not everybody goes to this church. So a number of churches represented here, quite a few actually. If you want to advertise in your church, take one of those flyers, and if the church will allow you, of course, post that on the church board. And all those flyers, if you don't get the hard copy, you can get them off of our website as well. So remember that. On the resources back there, I want to remind you that Pat and Sandy and their 2 daughters have quite a few books from their books and DVDs from the ministry they've been involved in over the years. So take advantage of that and visit their table. And our resources from the Apologetics Forum also back there. We have quite a few new books and DVDs that are priced for half price, 50% off list. So, so there's a section there. There's also a section of free books. Then there's a section of new books as well. So take advantage of that. So let me just close in a word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed so you can look at the resources and also get some refreshments. Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for Pat and Sandy and their two daughters and their ministry, and thank you for his sharing with us tonight. And we pray that the word would go out, your word would go out, and that people would share what they've learned here with their family, friends, and colleagues. We just ask you just now to bless each one as they go home, give them traveling mercies. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.